Hey everybody, how are you doing? My name's Kirsty. Thank you very much for joining us today. So we're going to start with a poll, and my question is to all of you, what are the challenges that you have when designing a workshop, event, or meeting? So if you look at the poll that's being launched, there are options here. Are your challenges around thinking up new exercises? Is it working out the logical flow? Is it designing materials? Is it managing the client, or is it something else? So the poll should have gone out to you all. People are clicking. Answers are coming in. Well, 73% of you have voted. If it's something else, hit the something else button. Currently, 50% of us are saying it's thinking up the new exercises, 5% working out the logical flow, 5% designing materials, 26% is managing the client, and 16% is something else. Okay. Anyone else want to add their vote? That would be great. If you've put something else, can you just write in the question box for us what it is that you find? Oh, okay, Gina, it's managing expectations of the participants. Okay, thank you. Any other something else's? Okay, so that's given us a good idea of what people are thinking. Managing content versus activity. Thanks. Oh, managing content activities versus time. Thanks, Kenny. And LJ, timings for global reach and cultural considerations. Okay, cool. That's everyone had the opportunity to vote right now? Okay. So I'm going to close that so we can move back to the screen. So today I've taken two topics, but I do appreciate when it comes to talking about the world of design, there are so many areas we could go to. So I've just picked on two right now, but that doesn't mean to say we're not going to cover more as we go through. So time versus content, and the second area was creating ownership, safety, and engagement in exercises. So time versus content, the old problem that many of us probably experience. I have another poll for you because I'm really curious that when we start designing for a workshop, a meeting, or a learning event, what do you do first? So where do you go? So the poll's going out, so have a read. More people have just joined us. Hi DB, hi Kat. So we're seeing 33% of you grab a bit of paper and go into brainstorm mode. No one opens the laptop and writes into PowerPoint, and that makes me happy. 50% of you are looking at identify what that learning objective is, and 30% are looking at content you have and how we can repurpose it. Who doesn't? And then 5% is the something else. Some LJ's just written in there, you know, understanding the outcome that's required for the client. Anyone else want to add in a response before I close this poll? Yeah. So if I think if I hit that, you'll be able to see the results there. So a lot of us go for the paper and the brainstorm. And and also identifying what those learning objectives are. So that's exactly what I have been known to do, and I do. So the first thing, personally, I think is really important is being really clear on what the outcomes are. So I have a question for you out there, and if I was standing in a room, I'd be saying the same thing. What do these two acronyms mean? WIIFTO and WIIFM. Susan, what's in it for me? And what's in it for the organisation? Thanks, Tim. So the two places you need to go first, if nowhere else, is when you're designing learning, a meeting, a creative session, is what's in it for the organisation. There is absolutely no point to be running anything, a meeting or an event, if it's not linking back into what the organisation is looking to achieve. So I'm always looking to have conversations with my learning partners around how does this fit with your strategy and your business strategy. Sometimes a lot of companies now have their global ambitions or their local ambitions or their 2-3 year strategy. Where does this learning fit into that? So that's the first thing I'll always be asking, because otherwise, what's the point in doing that learning? And then what's in it for me? That's where I'm talking to those learning partners. And I know some of you work internally and aren't an external provider of training or creativity or learning. But even still, you'll have your partners internally. And the question to ask them is like, what's in it for the learner? So what's in it for the person who's sitting in that meeting room? And I think it's really important to take time to scope those outcomes. Now, the next thing you've got to do is you don't want to have so many outcomes that suddenly you've created yourself an absolute beast. So between 3 and 5 outcomes is probably where you're looking to go. Does that make sense? I'm sure it does for a lot of you. Some of you may have come across ways of writing outcomes. We have the SMART, SMARTer. For learning outcomes, you can use something called Bloom's taxonomy, and a lady called Christine Gadd introduced me to that, and that's quite a useful structure to look at. So Bloom's taxonomy, if you've not heard of that, go and do some research. I recommend it. And secondly, Robert, I think he says, you say it major or major. Again, he talks about how to create really great learning outcomes. So again, if that's something that interests you, I suggest you go and have a look at that as well. So you've got your outcomes, you're clear on what it is you want to be achieving, and these are in agreement with the client. And yes, you may have created them yourself in the first place, but you've cross-referenced them with the client. From there, you need to start thinking, well, what is it we're going to do? And how much time do I have? So sometimes we forget the time piece, and I'm going to suggest that's a question we ask up front earlier in our planning and preparation. So is this a 90-minute session? Is this a half day? Is this 4 hours? Is this a full day? Is it 2 days? And something I've started to do is, if you see this picture on your screen, is chunk my time up. And I find it really helpful to draw out visually the potential flow of a day that we have available to us. So what you can see in front of you is there's always a start at the beginning of the time you would have with your learners in a meeting where you're doing a settling period, and we'll come back to that. You've then got breaks, lunch, and you've always got the wrap up. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing that 90-minute session, 3 hours, half day, full day. You're always going to have this flow. Admittedly, on a 90-minute session, you may not have a break. I get that. But if you draw this out, you can then see really clearly where you've got space for all your activities and exercises, because sometimes I think that if you don't see that in your mind's eye, it's quite hard to visualize it. So just draw that out. Now, some of the key things I think we should always be doing in a learning session or a meeting or a workshop is those that time at the very, very beginning, and I call it settling. And this is a space where people come in the room and they sniff each other out, and they're looking at you. They're working out who's in the room with them. So sometimes you have intact teams, that's brilliant. And other times you will have people who don't know each other. So this is your opportunity to let people come in, settle down. And you can do that in many different ways. One thing I would never encourage you to do is the creep of death, as I've heard it called, or the circle of doom, as you get everyone to introduce themselves and one thing they love and one thing they hate and one thing we don't know about them. Please don't do that, because that's just mind-blowingly, numbly boring, though we've all probably experienced it. So think about how you can settle people down with an exercise, maybe looking at outcomes they want to achieve, but get them into the topic that you are working on as soon as possible. The other thing as well not to forget is the end of the day. So you can see at the end of the day on this wall, you've got actions and commitments, and you've also got a wrap up. Sometimes what happens in meetings, and this happens in many different types of meetings, we rush towards the end of our time together and there's a sense of pure relief, and we don't give enough time for those commitments and actions. So put that time in, be bold, keep it there, and keep it available. So I'm just going to answer some questions that have popped up. Sandra and Savannah, yes, we will come back to you on the taxonomy references, Major. I'll send those out to you. I'll send it to everybody in the follow-up email that will come out after this, so you can all see it for yourselves. Any questions or any thoughts anyone wants to throw in the mix at this point? I take the overwhelming silence as everyone's okay out there. Cool.
Before you move on, Kirsty, there is a new question come in, I think. Do you want to just check it down? I find mind mapping works great at this stage. Oh, Kenny, you must have seen Kirsty's screens.
So that is true. That's the next picture that I was going to put up, Kenny. Is this is my brainstorm that I use. If that's what you're thinking about, if you're saying like just get all your ideas out, and I use post-it notes, as you can see, because it allows me to move it around. And the logical flows, you're looking at that screen, is start in the top left-hand corner, and it flows clockwise around my page. But obviously, this is my brainstorm for a one-day workshop, and there's loads on there, and so I was taking things out a lot, as you would think and as you would notice.
Couple of questions, Kirsty.
Yeah.
What icebreakers do you use that's not a circle of doom, from Silvana? And go on.
So icebreakers, I'm not a fan of them, because to me they imply that when you're running, if we're running a session, if you're doing an icebreaker, it's almost like there's some ice to break, so I don't go in with that mentality. And also I go with the thought that any exercise I do is going to be related to the topic that we have or that we are going to be discussing. So I will use a variety depending on what we're looking at, whether it's leadership, selling, marketing, it will change. But Silvana, I'm really happy to talk to you outside of this in terms of icebreakers, or I should say exercises, because I think there's so many different types. You can have people working in pairs, you can have them working in trios, you could have them doing some reflection first on why they're there, what is it they want to achieve, and then bringing those thoughts, sharing them. Last week I did an exercise with a client. I asked them to draw a picture of a car, real or imagined, so that they could relate it to what we were talking about, them as a team. And then we did a big gallery, and they talked to their pictures, so that helped them step into the situation that we were going to be talking about in that day.
Great.
Naomi, your question, is there any way of seeing everyone else's questions just to help with the sharing of info? Honest answer, I don't know. I'm going to ask Sarah to play with the technology and see if she understands how to make that work. Gina, during the settling time, would you get people to work in pairs to start thinking about the topic that they share with each other's thoughts? Yes, I do, because it allows, because you've got adults coming into the room, so adults come with lots of clutter, they come with lots of preconceived ideas, they come with opinions, they come with notions. So I'd rather they started talking and expending some of that energy as soon as they get in, rather than sitting listening to me or a leader in the room talking and talking and talking for 20, 30, 40 minutes. I don't find that adds value in a lot of instances. So I'd rather the group started doing something straight away. But that's very much my style. And some of you have worked with me before, and some of you have been along to gatherings, or I've actually facilitated with you, and you know that's how I show up and how I do things. So that's me. I get it. It's not everybody's style, but it's something I definitely recommend.
Okay.
Any other questions at this point?
So, Kirsty, one thing, Kenny's shared some digital apps. I don't know why I use the word digital, but anyway, some apps that help with my mapping, and I've said that you will share those with the other references for Robert Madger, etc. at the end.
Naomi, thank you for your comment. It's a great way to start, and you'd agreed about the icebreakers in that they should have a purpose, and I think, yeah, that's a good way of saying it. I think anything that you're doing, especially now that learning is getting shorter and people are giving us less and less time when we're in that space, you've got to have meaning and purpose. So always be linking back what you are doing in that settling period with what you're looking to achieve overall, so it ties into the journey. So moving on, thinking about time and content, actually I have a poll for you all. I am curious if anyone else has been asked to do this. So here is the poll. And the question is, who's been asked by a client just to squeeze something else in to the design and to the day? Some percent of you voted. I feel like I'm on like a TV show and you can see it going tick, 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 tick. A few more of you to vote if you can find the buttons. So how many of us have been asked just to squeeze something else in to our agenda design? 79% said yes, 21% said no. That's fair enough. I'd be curious how you manage your clients so they don't push you to add extra in. The point is, though, we do get those challenges and we do get asked, could you just add in another session? Or, you know that exercise you've done for me before? Can you put that in? And that's one of the things we have to be really strong is by saying no, and being able to hold the space and really recognize what it takes when you're designing, how much you can physically fit into the time that you've been given. Silvana said, sometimes it's not squeeze in, but rather reduce the time and still include all of the issues and outcomes that we have to achieve. And I'm sure some of you have been asked, can you go from a 2-day workshop to a 1-day workshop? And my answer is always, yes, of course we can. And what is it we're going to cover, and what is it we're going to leave out? And what's the depth you really want to take people to? Because there's only going to be so much that you can actually achieve. So here's a question for you. Once upon a workshop. So in a workshop that I run with clients, corporate clients and practitioners, it's all about delivery, design and delivery and facilitation practice. And one of the exercises we do on day 2 is around delivering in pairs and getting feedback from our peers who are in the room with us and also the facilitator. And every pair is given 20 minutes to do some delivering. And in the example I'm using here, there were 4 pairs. So my questions to you are, what do the 80 and the 121 represent in this particular example and exercise? So you've got 4 pairs of people. They were given 20 minutes each to deliver a session, a learning session. And we have 80 and 121 on the screen, and the words, "It takes longer than you think." So Sandra's saying the foreseen time to deliver versus actual time. Philippa, time pairs presenting time for the whole exercise. Silvana, allocated time versus actual time. Kat, 80, the time it should have taken for all the groups. 121, the time it took for 2 groups to deliver. Kenny, you should know the answer to this one. I'm finding that you need to leave a lot of time for interaction, networking and sharing and fun, and carefully judge how long it takes. Gina, 80 minutes of actual time versus 120 minutes to deliver. So what's really fascinating, and I've run this exercise quite a few times, is the pairs were given 20 minutes each, and if you think there were 4 pairs and you add it up, there was 80 minutes in total given. Except we didn't put a hard finish on everyone running the exercises, and these are, a lot of the time, these are facilitators. These aren't people who are new to world trainers or facilitators. These are experienced people, and they are still taking an extra 51% more time to deliver the exercises that they had designed. So I was really fascinated when this happens, and it continually happens, and I run it quite a bit, and I think it's just something for us all to be aware of. It takes longer than you think. So even when you prepare and even when you plan, give yourself some extra time. So I really hope that most of us now know that, I mean, you can't run an exercise in 10 minutes and get from end to end, have a really great, rich discussion, and have some great learnings. It's just not going to happen. So don't be afraid to add extra time in to your design to give people that opportunity to learn. So I think that might be a learning for us all. So any questions? That's just some thoughts on time versus content. Any questions coming up at this point?
Kenny's got one there about what advice do you have about guesstimating time, and Joe also was saying he doesn't want to rush people, but has a fear that he will run out of content to fill the time.
Joe, I'd say trust yourself. We always think, I think that's a natural fear to have. But I think as you are progressing in your own personal journey, becoming a facilitator and trainer, you'll learn that you're never going to run out of content, because actually if you work and engage with the audience, half the time they've got the content. So I say trust yourself there. Kenny, on guesstimating time, I think you need to look at the structure of the exercises that you create, and we're about to come into that right now, so you're teeing me up again, thank you. But you've got to recognize that if you've got a large group of people, you split them into 5 or 6 different groups, and then you're going to ask every group to feed back on an exercise. That will take more time than doing a shorter exercise where people might be working in pairs and doing some thinking for a set period of time. So you've got to look at the design that you're creating. I'm just reading the questions. Silvana, I usually say that the time allocated is a guide and reflects their needs, issues, and in the moment. So one of the things I don't do is issue an agenda full of timings. I will share with people at the start of the day or at the start of the session, start time, finish time, and guideline times for breaks. Anything else is very generalized in my language rather than pinpointing timings. And the reason I do that is there's always going to be a few people in the room that are going to hold you to account to the timings, and then you've just made a rod for your back. And also, if you need to flex, it's sometimes harder to do that if people have got the full-blown agenda, and people might get quite attached to it, or some do anyway. So even with some of my clients, they get a high-level flow versus the innate detail piece. But I think we all work that out as we go in our clients.
There's a couple of others, Kirsty, there.
Adrian, I've just lost your question. It's gone off the screen. Hold on.
How do you recommend helping clients understand the amount of time actually needed, as they often want us to cram more into the day to get more bang for their money and may not appreciate how long things take?
I think being able to draw out the picture for them of what a day or a flow can look like, and then showing them the physical amounts of time that you have available, and when you know what their outcomes are, pointing out how you're going to get to those outcomes and showing them that the conversations that are going to be required or the exercises. I think sometimes you do have to go into that detail for some people so they can see it, and sometimes you're just going to have to really hold your ground and not just do some talking. Gina, you're talking about how do you encourage quiet groups, and Simon, you're saying the percent of trainer talking versus trainee. Let's go into these next few slides that I have around what can we do to create that ownership, safety and engagement, because that will be answering those questions, Simon and Gina. And if that's not true, just come back and remind me. So let's carry on. So one of the things I learned early on in my time as a facilitator or capability manager at Diageo was this. So my question is, what does this poster represent to you? Now have a look at the poster on the screen. What does that represent to you? I feel like I should put thinking music on at this point for people. Thank you, Simon. The flow. Yes. Flow of what would be my question? Oh, what does the bottom right hand word say? Can't believe you can't read my writing, Kenny. Label. Naomi, existing knowledge of the participants, where to start from and where you want to end, and what should you be knowing by the end. Start with the end in mind. It represents a journey. So the picture that's on the screen, I'll describe it if people are on the telephones, is there's a start banner at the top and it says experience and knowledge, and then there's like a running track, and at the end of the running track it says label and there's a finish line, finishing flag. So one thing I've learned really early on is we're working with adults, and adults come with all this experience, all of this knowledge, and it will be different depending on the person you have in front of you. And even in a group, the experience and knowledge of the group is going to vary depending on what it is you're looking at, whether it's functional capabilities, leadership, coaching, soft skills, IT skills. People's experience is just going to be different. And one of the things we need to get into our heads as the facilitating trainer is, okay, not everyone's going to be at the start point of zero, and people are going to be at different points on that running track. So I can't manage that. I'm just going to have to accept it. What I can manage, though, is where everybody finishes their journey and where people come to by the end of the learning time that we have with them. So what it does in my head, it helps me flip how I then do the design of an exercise. So what I would do is this. So it says a session flow, but I want you to imagine this is one of those activities. It's a chunk of an hour or a 45-minute session. So if I was designing it, I'd be really clear. What's the purpose of this session that we're about to do, or the activity? What is the outcomes that I would be seeking for the learners or the organization? Then there's the structure, and then there's the time. So this is a really useful mnemonic in many different ways. It's called a post. So what's the purpose of this session? What are the outcomes we're going to achieve? What's it going to look like structurally, and how much time? And what I would do is then I quite quickly get learners into an experience, an activity, or a discussion, versus me doing lots of talking and standing up and, I don't know, downloading theory on one of my big subjects is selling. So I'm not going to suddenly download lots of theory on, I don't know, questioning skills or listening skills. I'd rather the group had an experience so that they are immediately making meaning of it for themselves. So you sort of flip it on your head. Because I don't know who knows what theory related to questioning skills. And it's better that they can discover it for themselves as a group. So I give them an activity, we have a discussion, something happens. Then it's my role as the facilitator to help draw together the learnings that that group have had and to make meaning. So we often do that in plenary, we'll have a discussion, or people might work in small pairs or trios. Also, I'm getting them to reflect. And then what I do at the end, though, is I label and anchor the key messages that I always wanted to get out in the first place. And that way I know everybody finishes at the same point. So one is just saying eat, experience, awareness, then the theory if necessary. Yeah, absolutely. So that's how I structure a flow in my head, so that I always know we've got those key messages, and those key messages need to be related to the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. So moving into some ideas around ownership. So ownership with adults, it's all about getting them to take responsibility for their learning. So I don't know if anyone's ever experienced when some adults come into a training session or learning, they seem to sort of default to their 16-year-old self, and some of them can sort of just get quite sort of do unto me, come on, you're running the show, and it's just really bizarre behavior. It doesn't always happen, but often adults seem to take off their grown-up hat and leave it at the door, and they can sometimes show up and be a small kid again, and they revert to themselves. Gina's saying yes, she's seen that happen. So we can, in our design, think about how we create ownership for the learners. So it's not all about us again doing all the talking and having all the responsibility. So a couple of things that you can look at doing is creating learner books, learner logs, aha pages. And these are tools that every single learner in that room or individual has that they take responsibility for, they can write in. It is not a tome of everything you're talking about. So it is not a printout of all your slides. It is not chapter and verse and lots of writing. It's probably quite light. I'm going near around me to grab. It's probably quite light in pages, but it's got some questions in it. It might have some sentences, but with gaps in, so that people have to fill it out, and make it really interactive. So out of curiosity, I have a poll for you guys. Who creates learning logs or materials so that their learners, the people in their room, even in the meeting room, can capture their thoughts? Votes are coming in. Nearly there, 82%. Quite exciting seeing this come up. Okay. Cool. I think that's everybody has had the opportunity to vote who's online. So let me just share with you what people have said. So 30% of you said yes, love a learning look. 50% say yes, I keep it simple and on one page, and 15% not thought of it before, and 5% no, not enough design time. I'm just reading some of your thoughts. LJ saying I do variant depending on what I'm doing. Same here. Some have learning journals. LJ, can you just write what that means to you, a learning journal? And Kenny and I have worked together before, and he's come through the Wear the Spotlight workshop, and he's saying you've used them massively and with great feedback since then. So that's really good to hear. So this is a space where people can write down, I call them ahas or light bulb moments, but it really does make people take ownership and builds in reflection. And that brings me to the second point. So time to make meaning of what is being learned. So I am dreadful at doing this sometimes, and I'll admit that. So I'm a real chatterbox. I really love being able to talk to people all the time and being in an interactive session. So I forget sometimes as a facilitator to give people time and space to go away and make meaning of what's going on. And that can happen, and you can do that as in reflection time, you could do it in pairs, but I sometimes forget to do that because I don't put ownership or a high time for myself. So I just really encourage all of us to think about putting in stop and think times, 5 minutes of reflection, and it's also good for us as trainers and facilitators because it gives us a pause in what we're doing. Some thoughts coming up. So Gina's saying, in my experience, people like to have something like this to be able to keep notes. So that's the learning journal or space. I also like to develop some form of online forum for all of it to share post-work. Nice. Kenny, calming music helps with reflection. Absolutely. Another conversation for another time. LJ, time for reflection, prompting questions for reflection, depending on what comes up. Absolutely, totally agree. So the other thing I've learned about how to take ownership, and this is a really small bit of detail, is when you're designing, if you have the time and you have the tools at home, is write up the instructions for any activities or exercises that you're doing. What I have learned is, again, by trial and error, is we often put out an exercise to people, and I don't know if you've experienced it, hands go up and people ask you questions about what you've just said. So something to consider is having the instructions either written on a flip chart next to you or on a PowerPoint screen behind you. And by doing that, the people in the room can then just reread what you've just said. And people do listen with their eyes. So as you're speaking, they can be reading as well. Once that's happened, it stays permanently on the screen, so don't close the PowerPoint off. Also, leave that flip chart somewhere really prominent so people can refer back to it at any point in time. So instead of coming back to you all the time and asking for your advice or what they should be doing, you can just politely point to the screen and ask which bit of it they're unsure about or what more can you explain to help them understand it. And that sometimes takes the pressure off your shoulders again. So that's some ideas around ownership. Safety, how you can create safety in the room. So one of my teachers is a man called Tim Andrews, and he writes about how do you create safety, and many of us do this probably intuitively and without a lot of thought. Interestingly, when you ask learners and people coming into meetings what's one of their challenges or one of their fears, is that they feel like it's not safe, or they're worried that they're going to look stupid or sound stupid. So when you're designing, it's a really good idea to think, how can you alleviate those fears? And also, because it's adults, no one's going to tell you that they're They don't want to speak up because they don't want to look stupid. So we've already talked about the settling period. This is just a good use of your time to allow people to get to know you, get a sense of how you are going to be in that learning session, how you're going to show up. Someone's just written here, which is really good. You know, this is also, the settling period is a time to do some contracting. It's one bit of language. So what are you accountable and responsible for? Good language, LJ. And what is the learner's responsibility during the journey that you're going to have together? The settling period also just lets people check each other out, and also for you, you can work out who are going to be potential numpties in the room, who are going to be your allies, who's up for being in that space versus being told to be there. One of the things I've just realised I don't do, and I've done it consciously now, is no pouncing in the first session. So whilst it is great to stretch your learners sometimes and stretch people thinking and challenge them, if we start showing up like that straight away, especially if we've got a group that are a lot quieter, it's not going to create a sense of I can talk up. And what I mean by that is when you go into that space of using questions and you label it with someone's name first and then ask a question, because that can be quite jarring to the group in that first session. So let them warm up to you and you warm up to them. The other thing that is really helpful with adults is they want to test their ideas. So Gina, I think you said earlier, how do you deal with a quieter group? So what I found that works really well for me is if you put a question out, leave time to see if anyone answers it. So you've just got to breathe yourself and hold the space. If you've got that moment there, you ask a question and literally no one answers it. Let's have a quick hands up. Who has ever had that experience where you ask a question and literally the tumbleweed seems to blow through the room? A few hands going up. Gina, Graham, Kat, Sandra, Philippa, Naomi, LJ. Yeah, you put your hand up. You can put your hands down now. But you ask a question, then no one answers it, and you're like, I'm sure that made sense. I am speaking the right language. And for whatever reason, they're not connecting back. So the easiest thing to do in the moment is tell them, turn to the person next to you and answer the question. You've got 2 minutes, go. And I promise you, they will start talking. And the reason they start talking is, one, mostly people sit next to someone they know, so it's a friendly face next to them. And secondly, you're giving them the space to test their idea and their thinking with just one other person versus a bigger room of 12, 20, 30 people. So that's a really good way of creating safety. The other thing for you is you'll hear lots of noise going on around the room, so that when you want to call it back in, you can just use something really simple like, okay, lots of conversations going on out there. So the question is, and you put the question back out to them, and you'll hear it. They will give you an answer that time. And it's a really easy technique. Gina, you have a question. And then do you get them to share outcome with a group or just let them discuss in pairs? Gina, I will always get them to come back and tell me what they've talked about, and I'll just take a couple of ideas from around the room just so I get a sense. Because often when I'm asking questions, it's to test their understanding and for me to sense where they're at in their thinking. Another way of creating safety in the room is how you build trust with the group, and the way you can do that is share stories about you and anecdotes, because not everybody in the room is going to know you in the first instance. So having those stories, having mini examples up your sleeve is just really helpful. And I'm sure a lot of you have got those from your time in what you do and in your businesses. So, next thought, creating engagement. So, this is a thank you to Joe. You're looking lovely in that photograph. You might recognize your back. But when you create engagement, you know you're going to start creating some really great learning. So one of my rules of thumb is I get people on their feet in the first 10 minutes and doing something. So that's that settling time, or if you're going straight into a piece of learning, you get them up on their feet straight away. The other thing I do, and some of you have seen it in this slide deck, is really simple. I use a lot of visuals. I'm not the world's best drawer, but it definitely helps. So I draw posters that have meaning and have key messages for the workshop, and I will put them up around the room, and I'll put them up in a logical way as well. So I'll either spatially anchor topics, or if there's a timeline, it'll be very obvious once we get into an activity. The other benefit of having visuals up on the wall is you can refer back to them when you're facilitating and training, and it's a great prompt for you. And I just think it's so much more interesting than PowerPoint. And many of you know that PowerPoint is just an antagonizer. It can be used really inefficiently, and often it's just you flick through, and people's brains are trying to keep up. So have a think about what are some of the key messages that you regularly use in your learning and in your workshops, and have a think about how you would visually draw those. If you need someone who's really good at drawing, there's a great lady called Emma, I think I'll say her name right, Emma O'Leary, Scottish lady. I'll make sure we give a reference to her as well. She has a great newsletter, and her newsletter always has ideas on how to draw simply and making it really easy. Next one on engagement, I think this is blindingly obvious, but have exercises and activities and build time in for discussions. So I've got a poll because I'm really curious. This is one that regularly comes up for me, is where do you find your new activities or exercises? And the options on the answers are online, I talk to my network, in books, I buy pre-designed activities, they're in my head, I design them myself. So, a couple more responses coming in. Nearly there. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Just publish those so you can see them. So 55% of you, I would take it that you're looking online. 65% talk to their network. 45% of us go through books, and 50% in my head. So you could have multiple options here. Sorry, so that's why it doesn't add up to 100, I was saying to myself as I spoke out aloud. Let's just have a look at some of the things that you're saying. Gina, I talk to my network, but I'm always curious to hear about new activities and how to engage people. Joe, how do those percentages work? You could have multiple answers. Oh, sorry, Gina, spelling. So I have to say, when I'm looking for new exercises, I put it out to my network, and I think that's one of the benefits of building people into your gang, your tribe, your network. So someone's always done this before, and someone has always experienced what you're about to go through. And I think there's a lot of really generous people out there who do what we do, so I think it's always a good idea to ask for help. Online, there are some good resources online, and there's some good free resources that you can download. So I will gather that list together that I have, and I'll happily share with you. And it'd be good to probably hear from you guys who you use, or if you've got any go-to sites for new ideas. And I love the fact that some of you guys are doing it and designing it in your head on your own. When I've got the time, I can do that, but I know that is a bit more of a challenge. And then finally, to create engagement with a group, you've got to get people to complete their learner books. So if you've spent time creating those great learning logs or aha pages or journals, and you've put them out on a table or on a chair, if you do not ask people to complete them, often they just sit there not doing a lot. Your person will doodle in them, but not everybody does that. So one thing I've seen work really well with facilitators and trainers is, you know, calling out, take your learner book, take some time now to turn to page 10 and complete X, Y, or Z. Otherwise, you will find that it doesn't get used and it just gathers dust. And you just think, well, that was a bit of a waste of time. And you know how what great stuff's sitting in there. So those are some ideas that I have around how do you create ownership, safety, and engagement. And there's plenty more. And literally, we've just had a whistle stop in the last 55 minutes. And we have gone at pace. So I know you know that there's way more around all of these topics and how you can design and how you can create ideas. I have one more slide, and that is around questions. What questions do you have that haven't been answered right now? Actually, Gina, you're straight in there. So we need to build in reflection time to the design. Yeah, absolutely. Because if you don't put it in, it's really easy to forget if it's not your natural style. And also you just need to be able to see it in the flow and the timings that you are creating for a workshop. What other questions do you guys have? This is when there's like that silent moment through the meeting room. Okay, so Sandra in Barcelona says, how does one engage the client in design? So what I do is I do an initial conversation to understand what their needs are and their outcomes. So we design those together. I go away and write all my their outcomes down and check that that's what they wanted. And then I will brainstorm what I think the flow of the session should include and should look like. And I am pretty notorious, so I do a lot of work on A3 flip chart, A3 paper, and with some clients I just take a photo of that and I send it through to them, and then we have another conversation and we discuss what my sort of raw thinking is, and then from there we will refine, or I will refine, including their new thoughts, and that's how I do it, Gina, in terms of engaging them in that part. So when I'm quoting as well, especially for corporate clients, when I'm quoting for design time, the conversations that I have with them is also included, because don't be fooled that those conversations can take quite a lot of your time up. Kenny said, what sort of e-survey tools do people use post-workshops? That's a good question. It's not one of my fortes. So if anyone uses e-survey tools, can you just drop a note in to the question box and let us know what is out there? Someone's saying Kahoot, poll everywhere. Survey Monkey's free, says Kat. Very true. I'm just writing these down so we can collect and send out. Brilliant. So Ronnie asked about handling cynics or naysayers, and it's more in the delivery side. I think when you're in design mode, you just have to be in your head thinking how you're going to position and talk about what you're doing there and the reason that this learning or this workshop is happening. I think also knowing who are potential cynics or naysayers from your client is also really helpful to have that piece of information up front. What other questions do people have sitting in the back of their heads, either on what I've said or just from other thoughts from the past? Maggie, I know you had some questions that you put to me. Sandra, will you tell us more about the one-day workshop? Oh, Sandra, I love you. Thank you. You do the bit I don't want to do. So just so you all know, on the 28th of September in London, we're going to have a design class, and it's 9:30 to 4:30, and we're going to build on a lot of what we were talking about today and more. Purposely no more than 12 people, because we always make it as interactive, and it's about you. Everyone's encouraged to bring something they're working on, some design that they're looking at. Everyone's encouraged to talk about the challenges they face, so that we can use the experience and the knowledge in the room to resolve your problems, to get you to a place where you've started to refine your thinking and build up your knowledge. And we'll also share lots and lots more information and thinking, just like we've done in this 1 hour. But the difference is I get to see you all and talk to you in person, and I will bring chocolate. And it's at a great place called Remark, which I think is fantastic. And it's on a Leather Lane in central London, which has some great coffee shops. Philippa, are there any other dates for this workshop? Not right now, but we'll put some more in, Philippa, because I think it's a really easy workshop to come and experience. It's short, it's sharp, and it's interactive. So I will put another date in. I don't know if people want to do, if there's another date pre-Christmas, or whether you want to do something in January, when it might be a quieter time for some of us in that world of learning and development. Karen, hey, thanks for your question. Any suggestions to develop independent learning post-event so the learning lives on? Oh God, yeah, absolutely. How long have we got? Because we can talk about embedding. Well, I think there's something about managers. So if you're working in a corporation or an organization, how you bring managers into that ongoing learning journey, because I think they have a very big role to play, that they can either motivate someone to continue to learn, or they can actually take away the motivation. So I think there's something about engagement with managers. Whether you do webinars post-learning, so I'm doing another webinar this afternoon with a corporate client, and this is a follow-on from a one-day workshop. So we're having a check-in, we're talking about what's been used since we last came together. I think, and what of their challenges are, and a bit of topic building. So I think you could use that. I always give out a learning resources that's related to the subject I'm talking about, and in that are online resources, books, newsletters, articles. So you can share that. You can't make people go and explore, but you could definitely encourage it. So that's another thing you could do to carry on that independent learning, Karen. I hope that helps. Nice. LJ's just said, I found that setting an experiment works to embed the learning, and then allows them to play with concepts. So I'm just going to mind read you a bit there, and suggest that you ask them to go away and do an experiment, and that way they can come back and share their findings, maybe in a coaching session or in that webinar. Nice. Cool. And I got that right. You women can mind read. Any other questions at this point? I don't think so. So, two things. A recording, an email will come out later this afternoon with a recording of this. So if you want to go back over the conversation I've had with you one way, you can have a good look. Secondly, there'll be information as well on that email about the 28th of September. So if you are free and you want to come and join us on the 28th, that would be awesome. For those of you who are not aware, we do quarterly gatherings as well, and they're all about to start for the new term. So we're in the Midlands this Friday up in beautiful Leamington Spa at the Pug. So we have a gathering, so that's always good fun. And then the following week we're in Winchester. So if you're south of London, Hampshire orientated, come along to that. And then 2 weeks later we'll be in London on the 29th of September, and on the 6th of October we're over in Bristol. So the gatherings, a lot of you who are on this list listening now, I know have been along, and we have a great set of conversations and we're always learning. And people, these have been going now in London for 2 years, and the network's really growing, which is fantastic. So come along, come and meet people who get what you do. Come and do that. Also, if you fancy coming for Christmas lunch, we will be doing Christmas lunch gatherings in late November and into December, because one thing I've realised is there's nothing more pitiful than sitting with your party hat on at Christmas and a little party popper pooper thing and a glass of champagne on your own. It's really boring celebrating. So come and have Christmas lunch with us. That would be good. Tim, when are you heading up north for a gathering? Okay, I've got to do a Manchester one. I know that. So I will talk to the delightful Julie Dryborough as well. We'll set up a gathering up north. Guys, have a really good day. Dare I say it, we might be getting some decent weather back here in the UK. So I will speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.